Hello and welcome to Constructing a Data-Driven Organization panel. Don't forget to put your comments and questions in the panel to the panelists in the chat. And let me just dive into it. We're joined by Kim Prado, who is the head of client experience at RBC Capital Markets. And she spent 14 years there. And previously, she had many technology and business roles across the street. She will explain more what they do at RBC. And we're joined by James Yegley, who is the head of Fafnir, an agency helping SME businesses based in Detroit. He's had a 20-year career or more in the public and private sector, worked at the FDIC and the U.S. Treasury. So welcome and looking forward to find out more. How do you build a data-driven organization? So let's start with Kim. Can you tell us a bit more about your role at RBC?
Sure. So my team delivers client-focused solutions across all lines of business within capital markets. And our overall mission of our team is threefold, which is enhance the RBC brand by delivering customized content, deliver opportunities with next generation intelligence, and truly personalize the client experience. So we leverage the data sets that we consume internally and externally to create a one-stop shop to help salespeople and bankers get the information they need quickly and efficiently. So at the end of the day, we unlock insights through data.
All right, then James.
Sure, and thanks again for having me on this panel. Hi, I'm James Yegley. I'm founder and CEO of Fafnir Lab. We're a Detroit-based startup that uses data science to help small business owners access credit, recover in today's economy, and thrive in tomorrow's. My career has crossed over from the private to public sectors, from working at a national CDFI to the CDFI fund itself and to FDIC. And during all this time, I witnessed firsthand the promise of the fintech revolution. And I noticed that that promise wasn't always being fulfilled when it came to small businesses and other underserved markets. So I dove in and launched Fafnir with that mission. On this journey, I've been very fortunate to have a great team, and we've done a lot of great work. And we're definitely data-centric, and we're built around data, and data science is our core, and that's been our strength. So I'm very happy to kind of share our lessons with everybody here today.
Great. So let's level set first, though. I mean, what does it mean, a data-driven organization, right? Everybody has a different definition. There are a lot of buzzwords thrown out there. So what does that mean to you, Kim, for example?
So, from where I sit and with the role that I do, my goal is to collect as many data sources as possible, right? You never want to throw data out. Storage is cheap. Think back to the days when we used to limit what we would save, right? Those days are long gone. There's an abundance of data out there that's available, and we want it all. And so what we do is we bring it in and we institutionalize it. And what I mean by that is we map it to our internal identifiers. We make it usable and consumable by our applications. But we want to make sure that we layer intelligence on top of the data to provide intuitive insights, right? And make it really proactive in our environment. So basically, when you have all this data and you bring it together, now what we need to do is reduce the fire hose effect on it to ensure that we give the right data to the right people that's suitable for their business.
I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about execution and get it done, but let's make it a little bit more of a sales case for this. So what are the key benefits, right? You described the definition, what it means, having an organization like this.
Sure. I think, when we talk about data and what you're trying to get out of it, I think there's two levels. And I think the first level is data for performance, about just doing the things that you're doing now and making them better. And that's a certain level of improvement that you can get with new tools that are available. But I think beyond that, there's this idea of data for transformation, of doing things differently. So if you're looking at your bank or your credit union, it's what can you do to make things different? And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the challenge from non-bank players as well. I think what people are chasing is that second piece of how do you really make the transformation within your company, your institution, because when people are looking ahead at the future, it's those organizations which do make that jump and transform, which really have the best potential in the years that are coming very quickly, I believe.
Yeah, and just to add
All
to
right.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, right? The outcome doesn't change, right? Like, what James said earlier is we've always been a data-driven organization. Data's always been the premise of everything we do, right? And the outcome doesn't change, but the workflow does, right? But it's all about going from reactive to proactive and building tooling around the data that's similar to how we run our personal lives, right? Like you get a notification on your phone that tells you what your next thing is. You don't have to go into your calendar to find out what your next thing is, right? So historically we would go in, we'd have blotters of data, trade blotter after trade blotter after trade blotter, and we would know we would have to know what we were looking for. Now what we're doing is we're pulling insights out of the data automatically, right? And that ties back to what I was saying earlier around reducing the fire hose effect. The key is turning data into intelligence and making it proactive. And that's really the new, the more customized client experience that I'm referring to, and additionally, it's also the benefits of doing it this way are really time to market, right? Because you can do things faster now if you don't need a big fancy front end to provide the data to the end user. And then you get lots of technology reuse along the way. Because if you're reusing the same infrastructure and surfacing the same data just in a different way, that's pure technology reuse out to the notification service. And then you've got consistency and scalability across all areas. So think about it like this. If you're going to set up a data-driven organization, it's a horizontal across the entire firm, right? That is providing a set of shared services to empower all of the lines of business.
And makes sense. I mean, you beat me to it, actually. Sorry, James. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I'll just add to that. I agree with that point about driving more insights from the data. And so it's really having that ability to, on a more systematic level, in addition to kind of looking forward and forecasting what's going to happen, but understanding the whys behind the things that are going to happen and being able to capture that more systematically. And that is a great promise of what we're seeing with the data revolution.
Brilliant. And so as I was saying, you beat me to it. I wanted to know what's new, right? Because for years, people were talking about we're using data and all that kind of stuff. And even when you were an analyst, 20 years ago in the bank, you were producing reports and crunching numbers and things like this. So what's new? So brilliant to hear what Kim had to say about being proactive and, and using these insights proactively rather reactively, right? And I just wanted to follow up on what you said is that you are using this across the firm, right, across the bank. But obviously, when you go for a transformation, sometimes you want to see quick wins early, and that's why you focus on particular business cases or use cases and departments. So, can you share some of the examples that you have done, which were the instrumental in maybe getting more support across the firm?
That's a great question. So I'll give you one really good example. So I want to say it was like 6 or 7 years ago. I read an article about Amazon and how in 2013, 35% of their revenue came from their recommendation engine. 2013. Think about that. How long ago that was. So I sat with my dev team and I'm like, how can we do a recommendation engine for what we own, for say global credit? So at the time, everybody thought I was crazy. And I'm like, we're going to do this. And so what we did was we figured out what the starting point was. And off of our axes, we were able to automate a salesperson's to-do list in the morning. So for example, before they had the recommendation engine, they'd have to go through, read all their Bloomberg chats, right? Read all their emails, go to a meeting, standing room only to hear what the traders' axes were that they wanted to get out of, what positions they were trying to move that day. And it was all very much manual work from 7 to 9 in the morning to figure out what the focus was going to be for the day. So what we were able to do is automate that process for them by curating all that data, bringing it all together into a recommendation engine and tying it, against all of the typical things you would tie a recommendation engine against to actually produce client insights. So next best action. So for example, if I come in the morning, I look at my list and it says, Kim, you have 5 recommendations you should call BlackRock with about, regarding these 6 bonds. And so, what I'm trying to say is it goes back to what I was saying before. Like, we need to build tools for how we run our lives today, right? Because otherwise we're not going to be able to scale for the next generation. And, that recommendation engine started as just one desk in one region, and now it's global across all of global markets. So to your point, start small, deliver wide.
But I still would like to follow up on another point that you mentioned before, that you start at the top as well, right? So you need to have a political backing or sponsorship, from the top of the firm. And Oliver Wyman came out with a study recently on data-driven organization where they talk about it. And so, this is something which is obviously clear to many firms, but some of them it's not, right? Because if it's left to middle-level managers, sometimes it's difficult to push through. So how do leaders at your organizations set the tone? Again, I'm fishing for some examples, from the top of the firm, and then also that relates to James. What are your recommendations how to do it in terms of leadership style and the communication and messaging?
Sure, I could start, and then James, hand it to you. So it's all about owning the data, right? And having the business own their data sets, right? That's the first step, is that, from a technology perspective, we can move the data around, we can highlight insights. So, for the next 5 years, but if the data's wrong, nobody's going to use it, right? So the first step that we did is we set up, we took the approach that the business has to own their data. They have to own the quality of their data. So for example, one of the applications that we built, it's called Client First. What we've done there is when a user logs in for the first time, the first thing they have to do is validate the data. So it says, hi, Kim, welcome to RBC. Is this you? And it shows you the region you're in, your phone number, your transit, right? Everything about you. Then the next step is, these are the clients I believe you cover, right? Can you validate these are the clients you cover? So validate the coverage. Then it says, this is the team you manage. Is this the right team? So getting that client hierarchy and team hierarchy right up front before the user gets into the application and then calls the help desk and says, this doesn't work, the data's all wrong, is really, really important. Right? I can't stress that enough to anybody that's out there that's looking to build a new application. You really want to adopt some type of way of forcing the ownership of the quality of the data on the business. Because if you don't, when they get into the app, they may not come back to the app, right? So if you want someone to come back to your application, if it's not a mission critical app, say like a CRM, they're not going to come back if the data's all wrong, right? If it's optional to do their job, you're never going to get their buy-in and their support. So I think it's really important to capture all the data inconsistencies up front before you actually even get in the system to use the data. James, what do you think?
Sure. And I agree with you on that point about the data quality. And that's that's its own conversation as well.
Exactly.
I think it really is. I think for any institution, there's always this universal condition where people are resistant to change. So a lot of times if we're talking about, some of the people joining us today, they're probably thinking about, they're at the early stages of this transformation, and how do I do that successfully? Like any other change effort, there is going to be resistance to change, and it does need to be led at the top. And so you have to have that culture that is supportive, that first of all recognizes the urgency and says that we all need to buy into it. And it is going to be a bumpy road. It's not going to be a smooth road. And so you have to have that support with the people who are leading any change effort to let them know that, you have their back for that. I would think hopefully now, at this day and age, 2021 now, that within an organization, there is more of a heightened sense of the importance of data and more of a sense of urgency. And hopefully that leads to more buy-in. I would say part of the process, and this actually is connected to some of the things that you talked about, Kim, is you can't just simply have a data team and then now I've got a team that's here's my loan officer or here's my risk management team. You need to have these different business units working together. And that also means that they have to kind of learn each other's language and learn each other's perspective. So if you are not a data person, but you have these other functional roles, you need to understand the data. And the people who are the data scientists or whatever, they need to understand your business needs as well. So you need that communication that goes along with making the data better.
Right. So we very seamlessly got into the execution topics, but I would like to follow up and contrast, the two different worlds that you're in. Obviously, James, you work with SMEs or SMBs, right? Small and medium enterprises and businesses. And Kim, you are at the large incumbent. So do you think, James, this is easier for your clients, SMEs or not, right? I mean, obviously, smaller organizations, but maybe they were not always as digital, right? And they don't have the huge IT departments and things like this. So how do they do this? Perhaps it's more of a case of outsourcing, using all kinds of tools that are there for small businesses these days, or not. I mean, how do you go about this if you're a small business owner?
Sure, sure. And I'll just clarify that we also work with financial institutions, and what Fafner's role and the tools that we build are really platforms that connect small businesses and banks, so that it's something, and that's the solution to helping these small businesses access credit and build their capacity to make them more creditworthy and to help lenders understand them better. So the way we see it is, our job is to really be the data science shop and to understand the data. But to do that, we need to understand both the needs of small businesses and the needs of lenders, and then connect them together. So for us, it's not just about us being data driven, but it's about both sides of this relationship. So we're developing tools to help small business owners understand their financial condition and their financial data, and make projections about what's going to happen in the future, especially with everything going on here. And to understand, is my business right now creditworthy or not? And what do I need to do to get there? What's my work ahead of me? And then on the other side, for a lender to understand what's the condition of my customer, whether they're a borrower today or not. And hopefully we're taking that insight from the small business and sharing it with the lender, and then taking that lender's understanding and sharing that with the small business. So it's about connecting everybody, and we're trying to find the best ways to really take, again, data and technical information and provide it to users who are not technical, and that's not their role.
Right, understood. So coming back to you, Kim, because obviously you work at the large bank, and that's a regulated business. You have many large institutional clients as well. So I do recognize you said that you've been always a data-driven organization, but of course you implementing changes, right? You want to make it better and things like this. But unlike a small fintech startup that is potentially even not in a regulated space where they can experiment and there's a lot less to lose, how do you go about it? Because you obviously have to protect the BAU business, and at the same time you might have a huge transformation going on, and you need to manage the two. So quite a tough job, I would have thought. But so tell us how it is in real life.
If you think about it like this, trying to change the wheels on the bus while the bus is moving is exactly what I try to do every day. So yeah, it has its challenges. But there's a lot of things we've been able to do over the years to, minimize that pain. So, for example, I love partnering with fintechs, and so one of the ones that we are deeply, engaged with, and we've partnered with extensively, is OpenFin. So, OpenFin is a way that enables interoperability between applications, right? It's a container for your HTML5 applications to make things work together seamlessly. So when I started the challenge, the journey, the digital transformation journey of bringing our data together and coming up with ways to make it smart, I had to first come up with a way to buy time, right? And be multi-threaded at the same time, to the point of keeping the wheels on the bus and driving change. So what OpenFin enabled me to do was just that. By creating interoperability between legacy apps and new apps, I've been able to transform the organization one piece at a time, right? One release at a time, without taking the whole big bang approach, right? Which we all desperately know is usually not the right approach unless you have no choice. So if you think about it like this, we were putting a new CRM system in. And while we were doing that, we had to also, figure out ways to map all of our client reference data into one single client identifier. So while we were doing both projects at the same time, we used the interop to actually create that seamless user experience so the business didn't feel that they were going through this giant transformation. Another example is this. If you're in your trading system and you get a list from your client of like a portfolio of bonds that they're interested in, one of the things we did to ease the pain is, instead of having to have them key each one at a time into the system, actually highlight the list and right click and send it to our internal system. Sounds like no big deal, but again, that's the power of interoperability and having a messaging bus on the desktop. Being able to send data from one system to another is a big piece of our strategy, because that enables us to buy time and have less training as well as we're pushing applications out. So really the interop around the data strategy has been absolutely critical to our success. The other thing is, while we're going through the transformation and the change, we always build out prod parallel environments where we can. So this way we can at least see what's going to happen, right? It's like one of those things where if you're not testing in production, it's really hard to know if you're going to go live the right way, right? But we're not allowed to test in production. So what do I do, right? So creating multiple data environments to enable that type of testing is really important as well. And I would also say, just last bit on the legacy infrastructure, if you think about ETL and the concept of bringing in all the different data sources and normalizing them and then making them available to the applications, it's really difficult. And so one of the other things we've been able to do is leverage Legend, which is an open source platform that Goldman Sachs actually contributed to GitHub through the Finos organization. So Finos is the open source financial services open source community. I'm the vice chair of that board. And what we do, and we're governed by the Linux Foundation as well, is what we do is we come up with industry-wide problems that we want to solve as a team, right? And create projects to actually help the industry, solve some of these common themes. So I would recommend anybody that's listening to go to that website, finos.org, and look at some of the projects that are going on out there that you can just download. So if you think about where we are today, we've got build, we've got buy, and we've got open source. And it's really being able to bring the best of all three approaches together to create that data-driven organization where we can actually drive change and be compliant with all of our regulatory needs.
All right, makes sense. Sounds good. But I'd like to follow up on one thing and on your parallel. Changing the wheels on the bus while you're driving, because that's one problem, right? It's kind of how to do it in parallel while you're driving. But comparing to small businesses, and startups, etc., the other problem that you might have is like, do I need to change the tire or the entire wheel, right? So that means more like experimenting and testing and things like this. And in large organizations, what I've seen is that's always it's often a challenge, because the business can say, can we just check the commercial appetite for this, right? And then the compliance and the legal come in and they say, well, it's a bank, so you need to look at it entirely from the entire spectrum of issues. Otherwise, this we cannot say one yay or nay. So how do you go about testing and being nimble and getting inspired by potentially the startups, even though, yes, you have this issue of legacy infrastructure being regulated in industry, but how do you even decide how much money you're going to put into a particular project, or how much effort and time you're going to spend on it? In other words, wheel or the tire or the screw on it, while you're actually still driving a bus.
Right. I think that's a great question. So, one of the things we had to do, so as part of my remit running global investment banking technology, I do a ton of POCs with fintechs. I am constantly working with the fintech community to figure out where we can buy a capability instead of building it, right? Because anything that can give me a faster time to market, I'm all in. So what we had to do was work very close with our procurement department to come up with a simple NDA to make kicking off the POCs easier. So we have a very good relationship with our procurement group folks to actually drive the POCs to go faster. So that's the first thing. Where it gets complicated is when we want to take what we've tested and put it into production. And that's where it gets more complicated, when now you have all the overhead of the PIA, the privacy assessments, the risk assessments, the MSA, all the other stuff that comes along with actually purchasing the software. And that's something that we're constantly trying to refine, right? And come up with a different process based upon what type of fintech it is, what we're trying to do with the fintech, and so on, because one size doesn't fit all. But it is complicated. It is hard. I will say we are difficult to deal with sometimes in that sense, but we are all over it and trying to streamline it for the fintechs out there. So don't give up on us. I know you don't want to work with banks, but don't give up on us, because we want to work with you. But I would say also just, it depends on the company. Like, I can't answer that question in a simple way, because it's not a simple question, right? It depends. It depends on the use case.
Right. Now, turning over to James, obviously a different dynamics there, right? But you said you work with startups, and you are a startup yourself, or small business enterprises. So, what's your advice? How can these businesses can learn from others?
Sure thing, and I think I've had that advantage of having to work for large organizations and federal agencies as well before moving into the startup world. So seeing, crossing over these different cultures, and really to Kim's point earlier on, I've worked in institutions where you still have that, not just a legacy system, but that legacy mindset that says, if I'm going to implement a new system, a new approach to data, it has to be perfect out the box, and we can't put it in production until it's perfect. And it has to be this big, massive effort, which then goes on forever, and it will eat up all your IT spend for years and years, and then it never gets released. And then you have, this promise of fintechs that says we can be nimble and we can do all this fail faster. I don't know. A lot of large organizations, you start throwing around the word fail, they're not going to listen to the word that came after it. But still, you have to embrace that new approach of saying, let's try things out and get the parts that work to work, and then build from them and continue to build from them. And so that is a different approach, but it does bring you some of those early wins and those early demonstrations that, again, will hopefully bring in more buy-in. As a fintech and a startup, we're a small business ourselves. So we understand exactly what small businesses are going through. And we're still a very young firm. So we're definitely, walking through the shoes of some of our partners as well. And I think in working with financial institutions, again, I'm fortunate to have that background where I understand where you are coming from as an institution. So the issues that you have about, data security and data protection, or reputational risks, or all these issues that, a normal startup or fintech isn't even thinking about. And if you're working with the first time with a new potential fintech partner and having those conversations, that's part of what you have to put on the table, is to really help them understand your perspective as an institution and what the process might be. And I think, Kim, you really touched on all of this. So what it means, it's okay to, your pitch, it sounds good to us. Well, how do we make this real? And who are all the different persons at my organization who have to sign off on this? And what are our concerns? And whether it's a technical concern, again, is it about what are your protocols for data protection? What do you have in place for that? Have you been thinking about that? Have you instituted that? And then making those things clear so that in a fintech, which has very small resources, they do need time to plan and prepare for that, so that if you have certain requirements or needs that they're not aware of, it will take them, some time to figure out the best way to address that. So I think this dialogue is really the most important thing to kind of bridge these different approaches.
Right. So I like to press on this topic a little bit more because Kim, you said we want to work with fintechs and things like this, and where it's difficult, and understandably so it is when you want to put the POCs into production, right? So let's assume we've done that, you managed that, so you changed the wheel, but now you actually like that wheel so much you want to change all the wheels. So how do you do this? In other words, how do you scale up that solution? Let's say you found a provider from outside and you would like to scale it up across the organizations. Sometimes what also is difficult is that you have different divisions. Sometimes the IT budget is owned by the business, sometimes it's not, right? And sometimes you may have silos and you have a solution here, but you tailor it so much to your division that cannot be used somewhere else. And then that's difficult for fintechs, and we'll find out more. Well, I want to find out more from James. How do they deal with that? In other words, enterprise sales that reach a certain scale that B2B fintech can actually operate sustainably. So how do you scale it up across your organization, Kim?
Well, I would say the relationship with OpenFin is a great example of one, right? So, initially we had purchased it just for the client technology stack, right? And the goal was to deliver everything in client through OpenFin. But the key here is to bring the other areas, the other lines of business along with you on the journey, right? Don't leave people out. You need to be inclusive across the organization. You need to do lunch and learns. You need to do teach-ins. You need to educate people on your strategy and explain to your peers why this is important, right? I am not the type of person to work in a vacuum cleaner, so I don't really run into that issue nearly as much as other folks, because I truly believe in bringing the organization along for the journey that I'm on. So I think it's really important to just educate the masses as you go and not wait till the end. Because if you wait till the end, you're going to end up with something that won't work for everybody. So bring everybody along with you.
All right, understood. So conversely, James, what's your advice to fintechs who are trying to sell to banks? And obviously they're trying to reach the scale. Sometimes the issue is, people getting drawn into customization so much that it's hard to productize and scale afterwards. So what's your advice there?
Well, I think really the key to all of these things is communication. So if you want to talk about, leading a change effort, leadership comes from communication, and it's about bringing up on your own team, on your own company. It's about bringing all those parties together, and you're doing that through that constant communication. And you have to do the same thing with your external partners and these external relationships. And it's whether it's even at the beginning of that process where you're getting to know each other and what your needs are, and trying to express in as clear a possible way, what your needs are. And again, understanding your decision making and your corporate culture. I think those things are like the most critical element for a startup, a small business. I think most folks have a good sense of where their capacity is and what point they can deliver something, and no one wants to overpromise and underdeliver, especially when you're working with a large client or a large partner. So it's better to be honest about that and say, this is what we can deliver in this time frame, and these other things that we want to do, we can build on them with time. So I think having that self-assessment, that self-awareness, but again, it really is, that communication is so critical, and it's something where it really hits you how often you do need to continue to communicate, and things that maybe on one side you think everybody understands and everybody agrees to, the people on the other side don't understand it. And so it's about messaging more than once, and also listening as much as you talk.
Yeah, these are the words of wisdom I wish I appreciated when I was younger, right? I completely see it now, I must say. So, but fair enough. So, Kim, coming to you again, because, great examples. You mentioned what you do at RBC, but what would be your advice to other leaders who actually realize, or they think that they are just transforming their organizations into data-driven, right? They are not necessarily convinced they've been there. They need to improve. So if we want to recap again, and as we coming to wrap up, what are your few key thoughts or messages or pieces of advice you can give to other organizations?
I would say hire the right talent, right? You want to hire the right people. If you don't have people around your table that want to change and don't believe in your vision and where you're heading, then you don't have the right people. You need to cut your loss and go find the right talent, right? Because you're only as good as your team.
And James, from your side, and maybe also we can complicate it a little bit and say, what have you learned along the way that you wish you had known earlier?
Sure, and I would agree. One of the things I've learned along the way is the importance of the human factor and these issues. Like I said, it's understanding you've got different business units with people with different backgrounds and training, and they have different goals and needs, and they come at a problem differently. And you have to bring all those people together and understand the different elements of it. And more so with data. Don't think that data is going to take over and solve your problems for you. I would say another thing, learning as you go through it, we are awash with tools to get more data. We're awash with access to more and more information, more data, more ways to model it and analyze it. But that's not going to give you an answer. So with your data team, you really need to understand the data, where it's coming from, and you need to connect it to what you're trying to achieve. And then it leads back to those human factors, because you can bring in the smartest data scientists, but they need to work with your domain experts, and they need that interplay. And again, the domain experts need to be open to maybe what the data is telling them. So it's that combination of really using these new tools the right way, but recognizing the human factor.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, Kim and James, and good luck to RBC and Fafnir. Amazing panel, data-driven organization. Remember that this is not going to go away. This will be with us and beneficial to all the businesses and financial institutions. For all of you watching and listening, please stay with us on the main stage for more engaging content, and we'll be watching the other content ourselves. So stay there.
Thank you, Rudy.